Hey guys, this is our first podcast, Stark Contrast. Um, was really kicking around. Well, I've been doing podcasts with my friend Nick here for a while now, and I was kicking around doing one on my channel. So I finally decided to put out a poll, and overwhelmingly and surprisingly, because I'm not, at least me as a person, like interactive, like I've never really done that kind of thing on my channel before. But overwhelmingly, everyone was down for that. So we're gonna do two different topics not every week, but every so often, whenever we get a chance, whenever we both come across something that we both really like and want to talk about, me and my friend Nick here will converse. And you guys are more than welcome to give us your thoughts and comments, request anything you'd like us to tackle, be it shows or movies or hell, even video games. If it has a touchstone in pop culture at all, it's more than likely that at least one of us have seen it at some point. So if you have anything you'd like to get our thoughts on, just let us know, and we'll hash that out. But for our first episode, we're going to be talking about season 1 of Falcon and Winter Soldier, and of course, season 1 of Invincible.
Yeah, baby. And it's probably for the best that we start off with these, since I think you're going to ultimately be leading the discussion on both of these because I don't have, obviously I did my videos for Falcon and Winter Soldier. And for anyone who's interested, my channel, which I guess we'll link in the description, The Ponder, if you end up liking this discussion, we have a large backlog of stuff, including discussions like this from the two of us. But for Invincible, in particular, I don't have a ton of notes. Usually I take a lot of notes in advance when I know we're going to talk about something, but I don't have a ton for both of these shows, so I think you're going to end up leading us on a lot.
That's interesting because you told me there was a lot of stuff that you wanted to hash out about the finale and that you hadn't really done that yet.
Okay, let me sort of preface this by saying when one of these things usually comes out, I tend to get way more bogged down in the discourse surrounding it and letting that inform my own opinions, not like letting anyone else dictate my opinions, obviously, but a lot of my approach to discussing these things at least can be really informed by what I've heard other people say about it. And I was kind of just at this point where, because I think we're in this interesting place where these Disney Plus Marvel shows being like a real, true, official part of the MCU, being such a big, popular franchise as it is, just there's so much input from every direction about these things and every facet of them. And I don't know, I felt like I needed a little bit of a break because there's just so much contrasting opinions from all directions about this show in particular, and I can see how that happened. It's going to be interesting to see where you land on some things. But yeah, I'm
Because
happy
I
that
don't really have that. Like I don't
yeah,
know.
it's definitely more of a
Lucky
me
where
problem than a you problem.
well we talked about this a little bit. I don't really have that because I'm in the Navy. I go in and out to sea,
Mm.
and I don't have that much exposure to social, or really no social media exposure while I'm gone. So I really just kind of come back and get caught up in all the episodes I missed. So I'm not really seeing a ton of what other people are saying outside of just the YouTube reviewers that I follow and trust.
Yeah, that's possible. That's probably another facet of it too. Is just the way that you end up consuming things versus me, who generally does it week to week, absorbing everyone's reactions as it happens. So yeah, I think that's interesting. But yeah, what is it? I don't know. Do we want to start with Falcon and
We're
Winter
starting with
Soldier?
Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Yeah, we've kind of already opened that box. So yeah, again, I don't know. Just laying out the fact that I I don't know. How do you want to do this? Because I kind of I'm not sure how to open this with how we went in expecting this show to be, and this show was definitely not remotely what I expected in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, because that's how we usually do it on your channel. So just like initial expectations going in, we had just gotten WandaVision. We knew that this was initially supposed to be the first MCU series on Disney Plus, but due to COVID and scheduling and how things shook out, we ended up getting WandaVision first. And I have my reservations about that series, but overall, I really like it, and I think it's a really strong palate cleanser. This is certainly more familiar. It's very obviously Captain America Winter Soldier-esque. It feels very Russo inspired. Um, they've got the same composer, and a lot of the score, especially the ominous Winter Soldier theme from that film, is brought back and used multiple times to great effect. Um, and that remains my favorite film in the MCU. So I was immensely excited for this. I I thought it was all but confirmed. Well, not confirmed because no one actually came out and said it, but at least, from the fact that they were introducing Zemo, he was throwing on the mask. It's like, okay, he's going to be our big bad going in. And it wasn't that at all. I think it's without question the most overtly political thing they've ever made. And I think they handled all that stuff extremely well. Um, I have reservations about the ending, as we've talked about, like before we even started. But overall, I think this was really strong. I like how much space they gave the story to breathe. I will say, I I don't really like. So I think the villains, the Flag Smashers themselves, um, inherently they're one of the most interesting aspects, but they're also one of the most problematic aspects. Um, but I guess we'll get into the nitty gritty of that as we go on.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm sort of going to lay out my own sort of expectations, and then I think we can honestly jump right in with the Flag Smashers because they are the thing that drives the story in a lot of ways. But yeah, I've been looking forward to all of these Disney Plus shows, and I think this might have been, I don't know if it's smart marketing, but the way that with this show in particular, like versus the cool, interesting things about Loki or say WandaVision, it's not really 100% clear just based on advertisements what's really to this show beyond the appeal of like, oh, everybody knows that Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan have this amazing chemistry. Let's give them a show where they get to just pal around a whole bunch and have some cool action scenes. When I heard that they'd cast someone to play Isaiah Bradley, and this was like a year or so ago when that casting was made, I was like, well, that immediately tells me that we might be doing some really interesting, really loaded political stuff. And I did not even halfway expect it to be as much of the show as it was, because you're absolutely right. This is by far the most politically charged thing the MCU has done. Like, we used to say that about Winter Soldier and sort of Iron Man 3, but this makes both of those two things look like child's play in the political department. But yeah, I'm really interested to talk about that political aspect in particular because, like you mentioned, I don't know, there's some degree of like what some people have criticized this show for, which is, it's still a Disney product and it doesn't want to make anyone too angry, and so it doesn't take too extreme of a stance on a lot of issues, but it takes a surprisingly strong stance on more issues than I ever expected that it might. And I'm kind of astonished at how mature and how sort of confident it is in all that. And the fact that Malcolm Spellman, the guy who wrote this, is writing Captain America 4, it's like, yes, please, give it to me now.
One of the strongest aspects of the show, well, I don't know about strongest, but one of the things that I really liked the most was that they kept John Walker so close to the vest. We didn't see him in any advertising. Oh,
Yep.
we did, but we didn't know like that. Like I thought when we saw him
We
in the
caught like a couple of seconds glimpse at his back.
yeah, when we saw him high five that guy at the parade, I thought he was just some like mascot. Like they were, doing an homage. Like I didn't know that they were actually going to have someone step in to fill the role of Captain America in the show before Sam took it.
Yeah. I don't know. Like it's interesting the way that I've seen people react to Walker, because I do think there's a degree of people who feel okay. So I said we were going to start with the Flag Smashers, but let's talk about Walker first, and then sort of transition onto them, because they are both, I think, the two biggest aspects of the show that contribute to that kind of problematic feeling that some people have, where definitely I think a lot of people would agree with what you said, with Walker being one of the highlights, if not the biggest strong point of the show, just in terms of being a really interesting, compelling, complex character. And by contrast, a lot of people would call the Flag Smashers the weak link of the show, but both of them, I've seen a lot of people who dislike one, dislike the other for very similar reasons. Again, it's all about the politics of it all. Do you feel like the show was too forgiving or making too many excuses for Walker, or like it had something to say with him that it bailed out on? Because I don't, but I've seen that argument from people.
Um, it's weird because the guy, so he's not even outright. You take the revenge aspect out of it, they are terrorists. Like as murdering that guy is, it's so complicated. I don't even really know how I feel about it. But I don't think the show is going out of its way to forgive Walker. Because honestly, short of taking out that guy in public and as brutally as he did, he really didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, this is a point that I'm glad I recorded at least my last video on the show before starting this, but this is a point that I'm going to raise there, which is that Walker really doesn't do anything that's all that warranting of punitive justice. Like, he doesn't really perform any actions that are all that worth punishing.
Yeah, the only reason that he's even fired is bad optics. Like it just looks bad that he murders someone in broad daylight with the shield with no context.
Yeah, and like viewers were primed to dislike him because even if they enjoy him as a character, it's really weird, because this is where it gets a little fascinating to me, where if you've seen the quote from the interview with Kari Skogland, where she mentions, like, offhand, oh, like, our goal was to have it so that everybody liked Walker and sort of felt bad for him on, like, the valleys and peaks of his journey. And by the end, I think we got there. That's fascinating to me, because even the people who love Walker from a writing standpoint, I could count on one hand anyone I know or have watched talk about it who like him. And it feels like the show is completely aware of that. Like, it feels like everything about him, with the exception of some scenes that are meant to sympathize you towards him, it feels like the show is super aware and super deliberate about making it so that everything about Walker is just kind of off. And it's off in a way that makes him seem kind of obnoxious and like a guy that you're not really rooting for. He's weirdly intense in moments that don't actually call for it. He's not reacting well to the pressure of being Captain America, and that's a lot of pressure, but it seems like the point of almost all of his scenes is that he's the wrong guy for the job. Someone even made a really interesting, like really in-depth thread on Twitter about sort of like the design principles behind his costume and how it's supposed to feel wrong in all the ways that Steve's Captain America costume feels right, and like the colors and the fabrics of it, and how that's supposed to be like, that's kind of weird and gooberish. Like, I don't like this dude. So it's so strange. If not for that one quote from the director of the show in an interview, I would have said absolutely every move made with Walker is kind of deliberately making it so even if he doesn't actually do anything that's all that bad, the moment he slips up, the audience is primed to turn against him.
And I think by and large, just judging from what you have said and what little comments I have seen online, that's more or less what happened. Me, I'm more open minded. Like, I love Captain America. I love Steve Rogers. He's been my favorite Avenger um since the Winter Soldier movie. But I was more than willing to, when he handed off the shield to Sam, I'm like, I'm okay with this. Like, Sam deserves it. It makes more sense for him to have it than Bucky. Um and like when the whole thing with Walker happened, I was like, oh no. But I'm gonna, take a step back and see what they're doing with it, and you know, not immediately dismiss the guy out offhand just because he's not Steve. Um, so I think it was really interesting to have the next episode after the premiere open, and we get to, immediately peel the layer back and see who this guy is first. And it's so they play him really sympathetic early on, and then the moment, well, not necessarily the moment, but after a few interactions of Sam and Bucky not playing ball with him, he immediately kind of reverts and snaps into this much more arrogant, entitled kind of a douchebag character. He's like, "Don't get in my way," and it's like, okay, so do you want me to really sympathize with this guy or not? Because um, before he even gets the serum, like, you can really see the seams start to show that there's maybe kind of a psychopath somewhere under there. And then after the shield's taken away from him, he just kind of throws up a new, like, fake shield and goes right back after trying to take down Carly. Even decides, you know what, my revenge isn't worth it. These people are in trouble. Saves the people, and then becomes U.S. agent. But all of that feels weirdly contradictory to me. Like, I like where we get him at the end, and I don't know how you necessarily smooth that out, but it just, something about his arc and the way it's handled throughout the show just feels a little messy.
Well,
I
I
don't.
know that one specific thing feels messy for me, and this is, again, something that I go into in my own thing, but like, I, for one, am glad that they didn't go like the secret psychopath angle with him, because I was kind of afraid in episode 3 that that was what we were doing, and like just the way that we were using visual language in some scenes is the way that you always see it used with characters in things who turn out to be, like you say, like, oh, they were really like messed up the whole time. I like that that's not where we end up going with it. And outside of that one scene in episode 3, I don't really have that vibe. It's not that Walker is like a psycho or anything. It's just that he's the wrong guy for this job, and this is a ridiculous amount of pressure, and he's just not the right kind of person to be Captain America. He is a perfect soldier, where Steve Rogers was a good man, and he doesn't know how to square that circle, and so just the way that he reacts to everything is wrong. It's not that he's a crazy person, he's just he's just the wrong person to be doing this. And so when we get to, I'm not going to call it a redemption arc because I don't think it is a redemption arc, but when we get to his redemptive moment at the end and where he saves that truck, I totally buy that that's what that character would do, because we don't do the thing that we do in too many other shows and movies where a character will like snap and then they just stay snapped forever. Like, I like that he goes completely overboard in episode 4 because he lost his friend, and then like an episode length of time later he's not gotten over that, but he's not still like a crazy animal out for blood. Like, he's had time to like sort of get back to just the person that he is, who is the guy who would, yes, save those people, especially since, they're politicians and stuff. I think the one thing that makes it feel messy is him and Bucky like palling around over the Lincoln quote. Like, I think if you take out that interaction between the two of them, suddenly it doesn't feel as messy, because that's a weird. Like, even if he has had a moment where he like makes a good decision, like having Sam and or Bucky kind of tacitly sign off on him is a mistake.
Yeah, there can't be a moment where they're ever decisively on his side.
Yeah. So like they if they're gonna ally in the last episode, then like it's an alliance of convenience. And I like that when they split off, like he goes off in one direction and Bucky's like to Sam, like I got it, like I'm gonna keep a lid on him. And just I don't know, the fact that they're just palling around making jokey jokes the next time we see them, it feels weird. It feels like an inappropriate moment that really undermines the point that we're making with him.
Yeah, especially isn't that after that whole brutal fight scene that they have where they take the shield from him?
Yeah. And like it feels worse coming from Bucky than it would coming from Sam because Sam, at least to start with, is the most sort of like understanding of Walker, and Sam is the most understanding of everyone, granted. But like Bucky in particular is totally standoffish with Walker, seems to have like zero respect for him, and I don't know. That's
And
just a
already wanted to take the shield from him well before the whole situation with Omar happened.
yeah. That's I don't know. I think that's one scene. Like I'd cut that dialogue between the two of them. But like,
Um,
when we get to like Walker's real last scene and he becomes U.S. agent, I've seen different reads on this, but the way that I took that scene is that like where Bucky and Sam have grown and changed and become better people, Walker made the right decision in the moment, saving the truck, because that's just the choice that he would have made to begin with. But he's not actually become a better person or a different person at all over the course of this show. He is the same guy in that room with the US agent costume on as he was at the very beginning of episode 2. And that's unfortunate, but he doesn't seem to know how to change.
um, yeah, that's. I don't know if I necessarily have a read on it. I just remember thinking that, like, I don't know how to feel as an audience member because, um, like, clearly you're trying to condemn his actions of, murdering one of Carly's associates after Omar was killed. But then at the same time, like, he turns things around and like helps them and saves that whole truck full of politicians. And so then you reward him with this thing, and I'm like, okay, I guess, like, he is a good guy. Like, I mean, he was always a good guy. He wasn't necessarily an antagonist. um but I just remember feeling like I don't know if the show wants me to feel as mixed on this as I do.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue is, well, I think this is kind of a separate issue. But I know that part of what muddles it for some people is that we're not sure what Val's deal is. And is Val, like, does she work with / for the government or doesn't she? Because if she doesn't, then that's sort of pointing more in the direction that no, really, this whole U.S. agent thing is like a con. It's a bad thing, and John Walker's just too sort of thick-headed to realize it. And that's supposed to be the dramatic irony of that scene. Is like, oh man, like you're getting recruited to do some really bad stuff, and you think you're still the hero in all this. Oh, you poor sap. But if she is like working for the government in any way, then that implication is not erased, but it's really blunted because now he is literally in basically the same position as he was before.
Yeah, the only thing that changes is the colors of his suit.
Yeah, and the fact that he now does not have a Lamar to like stop him from going off the deep end much sooner.
And what I really love the conversation that he has right before he takes the serum, because Omar, through the best of intentions,
Lamar.
yeah, kind of ends up being like the little devil on his shoulder that convinces him to take the serum.
Yeah, and this was a really great point that someone made, which is that it's this really neat unspoken thing that contributes to why Sam and Bucky can't vibe with the two of them, because Sam and Bucky are partners, and whenever Lamar and Walker are interacting, it's clear that they are like clearly healthy friends who have a mutual respect and like a nice friendly relationship, but also Lamar is the capital S sidekick, and like he's not just John's friend, he is John's fan, and he takes it upon himself to do a lot of emotional labor for Walker and gas him up and to be like the guy in his corner when that's not necessarily who Walker needs to talk to all the time. Like, he doesn't always need this voice in his head telling him that he's the right guy for this, because he really isn't. And Lamar's just trying to be a good friend and, like, help his buddy who needs, like, a confidence boost. But in doing that, he's also being a bit of an enabler. And it's this kind of tragic thing where it's like, it's his best friend in the world, but also it's exactly the wrong person for John Walker to be taking advice from it sometimes.
And that's what he uses to, well, that's what he can use to further justify everything that he does moving forward. Is like his friend believed in him, and got killed.
Yeah, and even before then, just if he thinks I'm the right guy for this, then clearly he can't be wrong. But yeah, I don't know. I just uniformly, like across the board, I've seen nothing but praise for Wyatt Russell's performance, and that's more than warranted. Like, the guy really, I think this character honestly could have, like, not to besmirch the writing, because I do think the writing is a huge part of it, but I wonder if in the hands of a lesser performer, the problems that some people have with this character could have been much, much, much worse.
And my first exposure to Wyatt Russell was in that kind of zombie movie, Overlord, that came out in like 2018. He was really good in that as a corporal. I don't know if you ever seen him in anything before, but I recognize him immediately, and he did an incredible job here.
I have seen him in something, but I cannot recall what it was. But
you want to talk about the Flash Smashers now?
Yeah, let's get on to them. So, like, how do you feel about those guys?
I think they're not as bad as the Hand, in that I have some sense of what they want to accomplish, in that they want to unite the world. What I don't have a great sense of is how they actually plan on doing that, because a whole bunch of random terrorist attacks and killing a bunch of people, I don't see how that in and of itself gets you your united world back. It feels like a super vague, like, we're gonna kill them all, or we're gonna fight back until they give us what we want. Like, it seems like a really vague and kind of fruitless endeavor.
See, I've heard that complaint before, and I don't share that. Like, I'm honestly kind of confused when some people say that sometimes. Like, I think maybe the show could have been a little bit more explicit about it, but I feel like they make it pretty clear, which is that, yes, the Flag Smashers believe in a united world, but their goal isn't, like, to go out and make the world, like, unite. Like, that's not a thing that you could materially do. And part of the issue is that what the Flag Smashers are fighting is literally the system that's been ingrained into world culture for centuries. And they do not want there to be countries. They do not want there to be borders. They want one singular global community. And at the moment, the only way that they can really influence that is by attacking the GRC. Because as it's laid out for us, and granted, part of this is the problem that I've had with episode 1 since the beginning, which is that episode 1 has an opportunity to lay out what the deal is with the world building and how borders and stuff, like, stood during the 5 years of the blip, and it just doesn't. and we don't get that explained for us until episode 4, which is one of the biggest mistakes of the show. Is like this big, massive point of context and world building that would make the Flag Smashers make so much sense is held until 2/3 of the way through. But whatever. So, as we eventually find out, borders seemingly did not exist during the 5 years that everyone was gone. Like, countries did become a global community for a little bit, and we're just like, everything's screwed. Half of our citizens are all gone. We've really got to come together as one world, one people, and like help each other out. Like America and France and Britain, whatever, and like Germany, we can't think of ourselves as separate communities anymore because we've all suffered this shared thing, and we're the only people who can help each other out. And then everyone comes back, and suddenly that's not the status quo anymore, and the borders are back up, and the global community doesn't exist anymore. And the reason that that happens is because of the GRC, the Global Repatriation Council. Like, literally a branch of the government, or like all governments, because it's the global thing, that sole purpose is to separate the communities, like screw over all the people who had a place in the global community that was during the blip. Like, the 5 years are up, like you guys are back to being the have-nots. And so their goal, on top of like getting like supplies and materials for people who need it and getting them shelter and housing and stuff, is to take down the GRC because they are the material like cause for these problems. So like I really think that's fairly simple. Like, they want to attack the GRC in particular because the GRC is dividing the global community back up into countries.
Okay, so that one agency or whatever is what they're after.
Yeah.
Okay, that clears things up for me. I've only seen, and this is also rough because typically I see these things at least twice, and I've only seen each episode of this at least once.
Yeah, again, like I feel kind of bad that I had to take so long to explain that, but I really think that's on the fault of episode 1. Like, I really want to know if there was a greater bit of exposition or something in the script for episode 1 that they got rid of at some point, because that feels like a really weird oversight to not just explain that in the dialogue before we even see any of the Flag Smashers on screen. I feel like we should be getting that context.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know right off the bat what it is that they want.
Yeah, and I really think even beyond the like the Flag Smashers as a group, getting a little bit of backstory for Carly before like she becomes a major player in the story really would have helped perception of her character and the Flag Smashers just as like a figure in the plot. Because I don't know, do you agree that the show gets stronger in the back half?
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like, and like episodes 1, 2, and 3 are still really good. 2 in particular has a lot that I like. But I think the big thing that holds the show back until we get to episode 4 is that we just don't have a clear picture of who Carly is or what the Flag Smashers are doing. And like, I could have stood for maybe in episode 1 or 2 or 3, but like, I prefer episode 1. Like, show us a flashback, or like show us in the moment Carly getting like kicked out of wherever she was and getting like screwed over by the government and being
I really think that's how we should have opened the show.
Yes, I was going to say that should have been scene 1 of this series. And like, the scene 1 that they did pick is great, with Sam just ironing the shirt and like him preparing himself to relinquish the shield. That's not a bad first opening scene, but even better would have been, okay, if... And like, I hesitate to call Carly the villain because I don't like to think of this as a conflict with a traditional capital V villain. But if Carly is the closest thing we have to that, just structurally, first scene of this show should be her being displaced and like her start of darkness And so we immediately get a sense of her interiority, what's motivating her to do all these things. We get to sympathize with her immediately. But with the way it is now, she doesn't really feel like a character until episode 4.
Yeah, she's mostly just, I mean, damn near background noise. Um, but so like I really, as you said before, yeah, like they definitely should have opened the show that way with Sam, and him like scaling back on, refusing the shield and all of that. I really like what how they eventually got him to change his mind on that by talking to Isaiah.
Yeah, his entire arc with the shield is, I think, it's like it's the story of the show. Like all of the Carly and Walker stuff and all of the global politics of it is also the story, but at its core, like the heart of the series is Sam Wilson, will he, won't he take up the mantle, and why? And we do a great job not just turning him around on it, but making you, as a viewer, totally understand why he was hesitant about it in the first place. Because, like, what I was expecting from episodes, let's just say from episode 1, was that Sam not wanting to put himself in that situation because he's a black man would be completely implication, and we would never just come out and say it. And then when we get to that conversation with him and Isaiah Bradley in episode 5, like they go deeper than I thought they ever could have, where it's like, they will never let a black man be Captain America, and no self-respecting black man would ever want to be. I never thought we would get that line, and it immediately makes this whole thing is just, it's so deeply personal, and it's, the MCU is a franchise that's thrived on like building its plots around personal character arcs that are ultimately all about the characters overcoming some kind of deep emotional hurdle. This is the one that feels the most true to life, that feels the most heavy, and it's the most surprising because I just didn't think we'd ever go there, of like taking this character's race and making it not just a thing that exists and that we're acknowledging in the narrative, but like the way that black people are treated in this country is the thing that is quietly on his mind all the time, as to, yeah, why would I do that to myself? Like, well, you don't really understand what that would be like for me, the individual doing it, if I were to say, hey, let me be Captain America. And when we get to the moment with Bucky, where he's like, yeah, I owe you an apology. Steve and I, as white guys, never thought of what that would mean for you. And it's like, oh God, like I can't believe we went that far. I really can't.
Honestly, I wasn't expecting to go that far either. I thought, we would tiptoe around it. Let's not air quotes offend anybody. But I was really floored and impressed with that. All that stuff, and even just small stuff like him talking with his sister, like all that felt so authentic.
Mm-hmm. And like, just like I didn't think we'd go farther with it than we did in episode 2, and that I already thought was pretty far. With obviously the scene where they're stopped by the police and like that whole thing. And so when we get to that discussion with the two of them in the cell with Bucky's therapist, and Bucky is kind of like laying into Sam, is like, well, why did you let the shield go? And like me thinking that they wouldn't come out and just say it because I'm black, and like, do you understand what that would mean? I figured like, oh, how are they going to stick the landing on this? Because this is clearly like a big thing that Bucky is not considering. And how are you going to stick the landing on Bucky's character arc if the thing that he clearly needs to learn is to kind of accept this situation and that he's got to let go of that baggage? And then they just do it. And I'm like, oh wow, okay, I guess you knew what you were doing the whole time.
um, yeah, I really like that scene too. The only thing I don't like is just we have to force that. It's contrived because there's no good reason why she would have Sam do a therapy session with Bucky.
Um, I could see it from the perspective of not that she's trying to like therapize Sam and Bucky, but that like Sam is there, Sam is Bucky's friend, even if Bucky won't put it in so many words. Like she wants Sam in the room to help her with Bucky. That's not how it comes off, but that would be the justification.
Okay. If they found a way of articulating that better, that would make sense to me.
Yeah.
But as it stands,
That character is also just a little weird. Like anyone who's actually been to therapy or is a therapist will tell you that
she's a bad therapist.
yeah, like that's she's behaving really unprofessionally, and it's kind of odd that we wrote her to be that way. But what are you gonna do?
um, but I do love like that scene in the first episode with her and Bucky is one of my favorite scenes in the whole show.
Mm.
Um, with him like, and this is a good transition to talk in depth about Bucky since we haven't really done that yet. His dealing with the fact that he is the Winter Soldier, or he was the Winter Soldier, and all the trauma that comes with, and him trying to find a way past it. Because when we first introduce him, he's having nightmares. He's in denial about the nightmares. He won't admit that he has nightmares, and he's trying the best that he can to quell that and move forward. Sam puts things in perspective for him later, but to see him try and cultivate this relationship with the father of the man that he killed all those years ago was really, really heart wrenching. And then later, towards the end of the show, I think how we ultimately handle that is kind of problematic. So I forget which podcast I was watching, but these two guys that I follow, they were talking about their interpretation of it was basically that Asian actor wasn't I guess communicating his response in the right way. Like he wasn't like really showing that he was shocked and portrayed as much as he should have come across in the moment. So they just cut the scene early and he just leaves. I don't know if that's the case or not.
I don't think
But
we nearly have enough to go on to assume that's what happened.
yeah, I don't either. So it's like I just feel like that's like he just says that and leaves. Like we don't. I mean, I guess what else are you gonna do? Like
I think the way that I feel about it is that the more I think about it, the more I'm glad that we don't get to see his reaction, because that's one of those kind of meta narrative things I like that shows will do sometimes, where certain things that happen are for the characters and not the audience.
right,
Like,
you
yeah,
said that for him, not necessarily for.
the viewer.
Okay.
But like I do think it's just a matter of the pacing of the scene, because even if we don't get Nakajima's reaction, I would have liked to just have stayed there in the moment for like a couple more seconds. Like even if it's just still like neither of them say anything and it's just more close-ups of the faces, like just it feels like the scene ends too quickly. Not that we needed more of the discussion or we needed more of the interaction, but it just needed to go on longer time wise, because it feels like that scene is in a rush to get itself done.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing because honestly, like once Bucky says those words,
He's practically out the door already.
yeah, like how do you even respond to that?
Yeah. So like I like that they didn't try to give us a response, but also side effect of that is that like he leaves and it feels like, oh well, okay, this scene is over now. Okay, I guess we're on to the next thing.
Okay, and like Sam basically tells him like you need to make the people that you're trying to help feel better instead of just trying to make yourself feel better. So the main thing was just giving him that closure that he's never had.
Yeah. And on the subject of Bucky, I feel kind of bad because looking through uh, the script for the final video and just my other videos in general, I kind of haven't talked about Bucky a whole lot compared to Sam, just because Sam is the more expressive, open character who it's easier to say things about and like pick up on things about. But Bucky's really, really interesting here, and I never thought I'd say that because Bucky is like one of the few characters in the MCU, supporting or otherwise, who I've just never been endeared to. Like I've
Now,
always,
I don't have that, but I will say this is the first time he's ever been a full-fledged character.
yeah, like I've seen it said that this show makes him and Sam into full-fledged characters, and I won't argue that that's true. But like Sam, I've always found entertaining, and I've always like enjoyed him as a foil to Steve and like a compliment, and I feel like he's like I could stand to watch him. I was excited to watch a show about Sam far more than I was excited to watch a show about Bucky because I already liked Sam. Bucky, I've always kind of felt like I don't know. And like this is obviously this was bound to happen because of the nature of the Winter Soldier as a character. He never really got the chance to be his own person. And that's for both himself and for the audience. And I like that the MCU is kind of genius at always knowing how to portray characters in the way that like is the most meta way to endear them to the audience possible. So Bucky spent pretty much his whole lifetime as a character in these movies, being just a blunt instrument, a tool, a guy who doesn't really get to have a life or have any interiority. And then this show is about, okay, he's been a tool and not been allowed to have any interiority, not been allowed to be a real person for decades. Now he's got the opportunity. What does he do with that? And so, like, I'm rooting for Bucky because I'm rooting for him to become a character, because that will also mean that he's gotten to a decent place mentally and has gotten over some of his baggage.
Yeah, and I mean, and because of how he's been as a character in relation to the movies, that scene in episode I want to say it's 4. It's how episode 4
The
opens,
opening,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, the opening with him and Wakanda. My God, man! Like
I know. It's so good.
it's immensely powerful. I felt myself crying with him.
Yeah, and like this whole thing, I suppose just this entire thing that I'm saying in microcosm can kind of be summed up with it's amazing over the course of this show how you realize that you've never really prior to the events and now between now and the opening bits of the first Avenger, you haven't really seen Bucky smile. And he like all of the little moments across episode 5 and 6 where he gets to hang out with Sam and his family and just like get to be a person for a little bit, and like he watches the kids and he's got that little smile on his face, and like the very last scene at the cookout and he's there and he's just like hanging out. Like I don't think I've ever felt happier for a character in the MCU than just Bucky getting to be somewhat normal for the first time.
First time in a long time. Yeah. And like he smiled before that. Like the most memorable one to me is, and
Oh
probably
yeah.
yeah, like he's like not how Steve's like, how you doing, Buck? And he's like, not bad for the end of the world, and embraces Steve.
Yeah, and also him and Sam in the car.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I first heard this show was getting announced, I kind of rolled my eyes. I was like, okay, so they get that one kind of funny and endearing little scene, and they also have some banter in Civil War back and forth. And like I remember people saying like someone should give them their own movie or show, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, whatever. And then like it actually happened, and I was like, oh, Marvel actually listened to these people. Okay, it's just gonna
Well,
be like
part of
like
that
a
is also like outside the movie stuff, like the two of them in interviews because they do a lot of interviews together.
well, yeah, but like that was clearly a discussion fans were also having.
Yeah.
So I was just like, okay, they're actually gonna do this kind of bad boys buddy comedy thing, and it's gonna feel super derivative and try hard, and I don't know if there's
And that
really a
ended up not
story
being
there.
what it was at all.
No, I was like, yeah, I don't really know if there's a story there, and then we get the show, and it's got some of the most amazing gravitas and political commentary I've ever seen in a comic book thing.
Yeah, like part of me was interested in seeing what the MCU's take on like a a proper buddy cop like Lethal Weapon type setup would be, but also when we get to this show and it's really not that at all, and it's a much more, like you say, a much more pathos driven thing where this is not like these are two people who are out on a mission, and that's the extent to which it's a buddy cop thing because it's not really following those tropes. It's about two people who are one person is just like kind of broken and trying to find themselves, and another is trying to make a way in the system that's like not treating him properly. And they both have different things to teach each other and different things to learn outside of each other. And in a lot of ways, their relationship does drive the story, but also they're allowed to be their own people with their own stories that reflect off each other, but are also firmly their own than you would expect from this kind of setup.
Yeah, so overall, I'm definitely like I definitely recommend it. I enjoyed it a lot. Um,
Well, I mean, if you're wrapping up, I mean, like, how'd you feel about Sharon and Zemo? We haven't really talked about him.
no, we definitely have to talk about Zemo because I love Zemo. But Sharon, the I thought the reveal at the end was super weird because I kind of already put that together.
Yeah, a lot of people did.
I didn't even think it was a secret until the reveal happened. I'm like, well, okay, that makes sense. Like even especially because Sam is constantly calling her, asking her for help.
Yeah. And, like, clearly the implication before the reveal is like, oh, she's in close with the power brokers, so she has, like, access to resources. But, like, no. The thing is, and, like, I don't begrudge them at all for making it a twist. Like, I don't have a problem with that. But also, as has been pointed out, Sharon being the power broker is kind of the only story decision that would have made sense, and the only thing that would have justified factoring her into this story in the way that they did, because I, for one, think it's really smart and really interesting. And I know that there are a lot of Sharon fans, or at least fans of her in the comic, who do not care for this twist because there's not really any comic precedent for it and they don't like making her into a bad guy. But I think it's a really interesting thing to do with her, to take this character who's been, again, it's the meta narrative thing of like, let's take what the audience feels and wants for this character and make that part of the story in a sense, where the audience has been very dismissive and very sort of nonplussed towards Sharon throughout her appearances in Winter Soldier and Civil War, myself included. Like, she's kind of not a very memorable part of those movies, and so even the other characters ended up leaving her off to the side and just kind of forgetting her, and that's gonna screw with somebody, and that puts her in this really bad situation where she feels betrayed and screwed over by everyone. And so, yeah, that makes perfect sense for a villain origin, and I really think it was a smart move to kind of put her in this position where she's allowed to be justified in her bitterness, even if it ends up hurting people.
Especially because like it's just it gives her something to do and it makes her that much more of a compelling character. Because if you're gonna put her in here, do something interesting with her, and they certainly did. Like making
Yeah.
her kind of a bad guy. I'm like, okay, like we're introduced to her, and she's the one on Steve's shoulder when she's at the funeral in Civil War, being like, you know, my aunt would say, if someone is trying to push you, you plant yourself like a tree, and you tell them to move.
Mm.
She's not the only reason, but that she definitely nudges Steve in that direction to oppose the government and oppose the Accords. And
Yeah.
then for her to be disillusioned and like go back on all of that, throw out all that to the wind and say, yeah, all that superhero stuff is BS, and I'm gonna do my own thing, and I'm just gonna look out for myself. Like, I really like that.
Yeah, and not just the superhero stuff, but also patriotism in general, where hers, on top of everything else, hers is a perspective that the show really needed, where we've got all of these different major characters with very clear perspectives on countries and how loyal you should be to countries, if at all. So, like Walker and Carly, who are completely opposite ends of the spectrum. Walker is a complete nationalist. Carly doesn't believe countries should exist, period. You've got Sam and Bucky, who understand just how flawed the country they're in is and are trying to hopefully navigate it to where they can make it a little bit better. And then you've got Sharon, who's a perspective that if she wasn't here would have felt missing, where it's someone who used to be in Sam and Bucky's position and is now just like, no, you know what, screw that, I'm gonna do my own thing, I'm gonna amass my own power, because clearly, like, the country that I served is not gonna serve me back. Okay, then screw that country, screw everything, out for number one.
Yeah, I think that was an inspired choice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Talking about Zemo, I think
Yeah.
that was also an inspired choice to not just outright make him the villain, because when we first got trailers, that's the assumption I made. I thought that was the assumption everybody made. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
Zemo's here, he'll be the villain.
Mm-hmm. Or at least a villain.
Yeah, or at least he'll factor in as an actual antagonist at some point in the story. And he really doesn't. Um, he's an anti. He's kind of an anti-hero
Yeah,
now.
like really the only way in which he's an antagonist is in an ideological sense, because he's actually super helpful and like surprisingly like odd getting things done from a plot perspective. And even when he's doing things that Sam and Bucky morally disagree with, it's not really anything that you could call bad or evil, but it's just that his ideology is in a lot of ways unhelpful and kind of harmful, and he's as much of an extremist in his beliefs as Carly is in hers and as Walker is in his. And getting to have just him and Sam and Bucky sit down and just discuss ideas is some of the best stuff in the show, because it really lets like a protagonist and an antagonist who aren't out for each other's blood just kind of discuss the different stances that they have on issues and philosophy, and it's really fun to watch.
Um, Especially because they don't have one thing I really like in one of their discussions. They don't have a retort when Zemo goes touche. There's never really been another Steve Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
They have nothing to say.
Yeah. I think he's really cool, and like I want to see him in more stuff, but like I'm not in a rush. Like they really utilized him well here.
Oh, it was so glad they didn't kill him in
Yeah.
Civil War, and I'm so glad they didn't kill him here. Like
Mm-hmm.
they definitely could have. They had their chance, and they just let him get taken by the Wakandans.
Yeah, and like they could have, but also they're paying a bit more attention to that, not just to him, but also Bucky would naturally have been the one to kill him, and he's beyond that. Like part of Bucky's story is that he's not gonna make that call.
Yeah, it's part of his growth that he can choose to let him live.
Mm. So now I think we've covered pretty much all the major stuff. Unless there was anything that you wanted to say about the action.
Well, I mean, goes without saying, the action's stellar. I really enjoyed it, top to bottom. it's Marvel, so of course, all the effects and fights and everything are movie quality, and it's incredibly thrilling, and the score is great. And
I really dig the suit.
oh yeah, I love the suit. Oh my god, the suit looks great. Um, so we, I really want us to talk about this on the podcast because we talked about this sometime today through Facebook. I really, at least initially, did not like that we kill Carly the way we do and don't address it because up until that point, we've been making such a big deal out of the fact that Sam was just trying to talk Carly down, did not want to kill her, didn't want to fight her, and he was so affirmed in that stance that he would have gotten himself killed if Sharon hadn't whipped out her gun and shot her. And like they have Zemo and Falcon have a whole back and forth about whether it's right or not to kill her, and violence isn't always a solution, or blood isn't always the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And turns out in this case it was, and there's no discussion about that. I think that's a little easy given everything else in the show.
I think that's a thing where I wouldn't necessarily have expected the show to come down one way or the other on is violence necessary to solve the problem? But I don't know. I just think there's so many things going on in that scene. And I think the choice to have it be Sharon who kills her and to have it be lethal violence in that moment on Sharon's part is, I just think there's a lot of thought and a lot of like story decisions being made with that moment that I don't entirely know if one of the big deliberate statements being made here is, oh yeah, it turned out Sam was wrong and you did have to kill her. I don't know, because I have
the
been
alternative is he's dead.
What'd you say?
Because the alternative is he's dead. She would have shot him.
Yeah. Well, he does have like he I feel like he you're right. Maybe because I feel like he could have easily blocked that with the wings or the shield. Like, I don't know, given what we've seen of this character in other scenes, like I'm sure he could have like not been dead in that moment.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. He does do that a lot in this very show.
Yeah.
But,
and like even with the non-vibranium wings, he was doing that. I think the show and like this informs the speech that he gives to the GRC at the end, where I think ultimately what it's saying insofar as the violence or non-violence thing is that Sam is right to not want to have to kill her, but that she ended up quote unquote needing to die anyway speaks to how bad the situation is. This should not have happened to begin with. Carly shouldn't have gotten violent. Things should not have escalated to the point where it seemed like she had to die and there was no other option. But the situation, the political situation, is so bad that that's what happened. Like, violent revolutionaries, people who, like Carly, believe in their ideology so strongly that, like, they're willing to die for it. Carly herself says multiple times, does not matter if I die. I am ready to die for this. And, like, she dies. She set herself up for that. And the reason that she ended up in that situation to begin with is because politicians were screwing her over. And like that's what happens sometimes. People get put in these situations that are so desperate that they think death is the only answer, either their own or violence inflicted on other people. They feel like there is no way out because the system does not give them any other options. And Sam at the end is like, this girl should not have died, but here we are, and you kind of got us here.
Yeah, that's first of all, that speech is incredible, and
Yep.
I think what you just said articulates perfectly why the death, like why it happens the way it happens, and how that best informs the story and how they chose to end it. Um, that I'm coming around on that as
Yeah.
the more I'm thinking about it.
Nice. I'm good at this. Also, I do think it also informs Sharon interestingly because, again, with her being the interesting, necessary facet of this whole conflict, uh, everyone, including Sharon, by the time that we get to the end credit sequence, everyone who's not Carly is kind of only allowed to survive because they're willing to work within the system, even with it being as abusive as it is. And yet, Sharon, being the one to kill her, like, Sharon kills Carly as a power move because Sam is in the room now, and if Carly is allowed to live, then she might out Sharon, and that would be bad for Sharon's, like, the system that Sharon has devised for herself as like the power broker, like leader of Madripoor. She's got her own system apart from any government, and she is now basically as bad as the government because she's willing to throw people under the bus for the express purpose of maintaining her own power. And I think that idea adds a lot of menace, even beyond just, oh, Sharon's the power broker. Okay, so is that really that bad? Like, the fact that she's willing to shoot Carly dead to maintain that position says, oh yeah, that's bad.
Um, I mean, even though she's a radicalized terrorist and was going to murder Sam, I don't
Yes, but
know.
that's
But
not
like,
that's not the reason that Sharon kills her. Like, I don't think so.
that's true. That's just the out that she has.
Yeah, like 5 seconds ago, she was like, hey, get your guys, come back, work for me. And then as soon as it becomes a liability to her identity, she's like, oh, never mind, dead.
But I'm very curious to see how they end up using her. Um, now that I mean, I like that it says Captain America and the Winter Soldier now. So conceivably, I guess they could make a sequel series to this called Captain and the Winter Soldier, or a movie. Well, we know we're getting a Cap 4.
Yeah.
Um,
I wouldn't be shocked if she shows up in Armor Wars or something.
yeah, I'm just very curious to see where else we end up using her.
Yeah.
If she's going to be tied exclusively to the Cap stuff, or if we, as you said, decide to stick her in Armor Wars or something else.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm eager to see all of these guys again, and I'm sure that they're going to be used great when they are.
Oh,
But
one more thing. We don't typically, so these MCU shows are interesting because the movies don't really do opening credits. They don't bother wasting any time with opening credits. Um,
yeah, you're right.
I love, huh?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I love opening credits for shows. I always like if they're good, I'll never skip them. Like the one for Daredevil, I never skip that.
Mm.
But so theirs are at the back. They're at the back end of every show. With WandaVision, theirs at the back. This show, it's at the back. I really like the score and like the kind of tattered wallpaper paint graffiti thing, like aesthetic that they've got going on.
Yeah, you mentioned Henry Jackman at the top. Getting him back was a stroke of genius.
Stroke of freaking genius. That guy's quickly becoming one of my favorite composers. He also scored one of the Russo brothers' newest films, Cherry, with Tom Holland.
Mm.
Absolutely terrible movie, but the score is phenomenal.
Mm. But yeah, like I highly recommend this. Like I really enjoyed this show. I loved it a lot. It's probably in my top 5 MCU things. Like, I think it's really, really great.
Yeah, I think it's definitely in my list as well. So
Again, stronger in the back half than the front half, but yeah.
So let's hop over to one of my new favorite shows ever made. I'm joking. I'm being a little facetious. We've only gotten one season. It's 8 episodes. I'm not a crazy person, but
A surprising amount of people are. A surprising amount of people are putting it that high already.
I love the show. I freaking love the show. So
It's Invincible, by the way. We didn't say the title. It's Invincible.
We didn't say that. Yeah, it is Invincible. Written and executive produced by the great Robert Kirkman, creator of the Invincible comic book and the Walking Dead comic book and show. So you already know I'm going to gush about this. So you lay out how you feel about the show.
Okay, yeah, and then I'm just gonna let you go off, because right now I think the show is pretty neat. I think it's really good. It's got a lot of good things in it. Do not understand the insane wildfire hype around it. I think it's a fun, neat, interesting show with some really great action. Sometimes the animations not there's peaks and valleys with the animation in this show, and I figured as much. A lot of shows have that. I'd be hard pressed to think of any animated series that doesn't at least have some bits of okay, you can tell where they spent less money here, but whatever. The voice cast is probably the biggest selling point. The voice cast is all great, and
It's probably what they spent all the money on.
Yeah, they got a bunch of big names, and you can tell they didn't just get them to have big names. Everyone's given a really good performance, and yeah, I don't know. It's really cool. I'm not quite super hyped. I think it's a good show. I'm looking forward to season 2. And you know what? I've struggled a little bit going back and forth with myself about what is it from a story perspective that doesn't entirely grab me about it. And I had a theory, but I'm kind of bringing myself around to that not really making sense, which I suppose I'll just lay out where I initially came to, the conclusion that I initially came to before I kind of fought myself on it, which is that I'm not sure that the central mystery of this show should be a mystery, because I think in retrospect, or I thought at least, that part of the issue with this show is that one of, if not the second most important character in the whole thing, I just don't know who he is or what he wants, and we spend so much time with him, and that's supposed to be the thing that we're figuring out over the course of the show. And what that translates to for me is just spending a lot of time not 100% sure why I should care.
Let's see. I mean, of course, I don't agree with that. I also read the comics. Speaking of which, so I read the comics a long time ago. I want to say I read up to issue 60, 61. Oh no, I finished. Why am I talking about it in issues? I read issue by issue. I read up to volume 12, and that's the Conquest storyline. I'm not going to spoil what that is, but I read up to that and freaking adored it, but couldn't get the rest of it for whatever reason. Now, when the show was coming out, I went back and started rereading it again from the very first volume, and by the time episode 5 came out, I'd just seen that, but I had to go out to sea. So I read the rest of it while we were out to sea for 2.5 weeks. Freaking adore the comic. Blew through it. I don't even think I blew through Ultimate Spider-Man that fast, reading it all at once. I'm not saying I love it more than Ultimate Spider-Man. Spider-Man is my favorite character in fiction. But it is really good. I would say it's a very strong contender with that. I enjoyed the storytelling. There's a number of things that I don't like that I think the show greatly improves on. But for the most part, the source material is wonderful. It's nowhere near. It's the polar opposite I had when I read The Boys. The Boys I had to force myself to read. It was like drinking battery acid. It was all. I don't think The Boys comics are very good at all whatsoever. And the show it takes all the core concepts that are interesting and work and makes them good. But with Invincible, for the most part, you're already working with a really great story and great characters and a fully fleshed out mythology and universe. So as I was watching the show, I'm like, this is awesome. I really like how they're adapting things. Um, I want to get my major criticism with some of the adaptation out of the way, and that's the Battle Beast episode with Titan and of course
Mm.
Machine Head. So in the books, that whole storyline happens well after Mark has that conversation with his father and loses severely badly. And that so in the comic, when he and his father fight, that's the first time you ever really see Mark lose and lose that badly. Um,
Wow.
I really wish they had kept that because it would have made like I love that episode, but I really feel like that should have been the first time. Like him fighting his father is the first time we should have ever seen him getting messed up that badly. It's already it hasn't been quite that severe, but it's already happened before.
Yeah, because and like this wasn't even a thought that I had, but I've seen people making jokes to the effect of like, "Oh, his name is Invincible, but he's always losing and getting beat up." And it's like that's not even true. But having him get beat up by his dad and then sandwiched in the middle of everything, having the Battle Beast thing, it does kind of seem like Mark spends basically the whole season on the back foot and he doesn't really take down anyone that he doesn't need like a significant amount of help dealing with. So if maybe the if I could see this being intentional if the idea was that by the end of this season we're supposed to feel like there's this insane amount of pressure, even more than in the comics, on Mark because we haven't really seen him be hyper competent and like really able to fight his own battles exclusively on his own. Like they need a replacement for his dad. We, the audience, don't know if he can be that because we've seen him like be on the back foot so much. I could see that being intentional, but if it wasn't, then that's kind of iffy.
Yeah, what I like about it is, especially because his dad is there. Like he and his dad have that whole conversation where he's like, "Doing this is beneath you. You shouldn't even trust this guy." And Mark takes the advice from his mother and decides to trust him anyway. Um, and that lands him in hot water. And like his dad's watching the whole time, but he doesn't intervene. He only intervenes during the Flaxen situation in like episode 2 or 3, I think. And it's like, okay, because you run into that problem when you have one of the most powerful superheroes as your father, and he's teaching you like, okay, so his father is just kind of come and bail him out all the time. It's like, no, he is going to have to deal with situations on his own, and he can lose. That's one of the things I really like about not just the show but also the comic is like once his father leaves, his safety net is gone. Like he's on his own, and his father doesn't show back up in the story for a significant amount of time. So I'm really interested to see how much Omni-Man is even going to be in season 2, or if they'll truncate some of that stuff and introduce him earlier than they did in the comics. Or reintroduce him, I should say. But yeah, for the most part, I really like all the changes that they've made. Debbie, his mom, she's super endearing and lovely, and she has a story unique to her that's all her own and not in the. So in the book, she's very much like in the background, just kind of there. She does have like a significant like drinking problem. That was kind of hard to watch in the comics anyway. Like after that whole deal with,
Understandable.
oh yeah, she gets into like a deep, like hard drinking binge in the comics, and it's rough.
We
And
could still do that.
Yeah, they could still do that. They kind of touch on it here with like her drinking alcohol when Omni-Man comes home. She's like, I know, and she throws the water bottle, not the water bottle, throws the throws the glass of I guess vodka at her or at him. Like her, that's a whole new level of intrigue that wasn't in the original story. So in the original story, there was no Omni-Man like is suspected of killing the Guardians. He just kind of, it's not even a fight. He just shows up and murders everyone except the Immortal in one panel. And then Immortal's like, I never liked you, and he's like, the feeling's mutual, and then he, chops his head off.
Yep.
But in the show, it's like this whole epic fight, and they're kind of giving Omni-Man a run for his money, but obviously they're not enough for him, and they all get killed. But he's so damage ridden and devastated and tired that he can't even stand up, so he just collapses. And so it adds, there's that whole level of intrigue and like who's going to find out, and like I really liked that. It gave it this extra layer of tension and mystique that the original story didn't have. I like the change that they made with Amber. We're definitely going to talk about the ending because I don't like what they do with Amber at the end, but they race bend her. She wasn't black in the comics. She was, white, blonde, blue eyes. And she was kind of your more typical Gwen Stacy, but like nowhere near as interesting. It was like she didn't know about Mark at all, and then she did find out about it, but she was like dealing with it, and he was just like, okay, like I'm the superhero now, and she's like, okay, and she's dealing with him constantly having to leave, and the way we get him with Eve is so cringy in the comics. I hate it so much. So before he even breaks up with Amber, he ends up kissing Eve, and like it's this whole like splash page panel, like it's a whole thing. It's like, oh, we can't do this. Like I respect Amber too much, and this and that. It's like, bro, you already cheated on her. But yeah, they thankfully they didn't do that in the show. But like, so in the comics, they eventually do break up because after a while, like Mark has to go on these a multitude of like space adventures and everything, and he comes back and he's like, you know what, this is just too much. It's not fair to you. Like I'm never here. I'm almost getting killed all the time. And you didn't even know I was a superhero when we first started dating, so I should just break up with you. And then she's like, yeah, okay, sure, you're right. And then they just break up. But in the show, what I really liked was, so of course you've got the classic Peter Parker thing. He can't make time for her. He's always late to stuff. And then she's like, you know what, screw it, we're done. I'm breaking up with you. And then he tries to do the secret identity thing. And it's like, I'm really invincible, and that's why I haven't been around. And
It's like,
she's
boy,
like,
I did knew.
yeah, I knew. And like that doesn't make what you've been doing okay. You still lied to me. You made me feel stupid. Like, bye. You can either fly or take the stairs. I don't care. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. That's a really strong, interesting change.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that a lot. And I'm like, this is a really cool economic way to get their relationship over quickly, without throwing either of them under the bus.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's different. It's completely understandable from both sides.
But what I don't like about it is when one of the Reanimen is attacking the college, she screams out, "Mark, Mark!" And then like when he comes back after fighting it, she treats him like he actually ran away. But in that moment, she actually knows he was fighting the thing. So I don't like that she just straight up pretends that she doesn't know that he's a superhero.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if they wanted to like talk about it, they could say that like, okay, this is an opportunity for him to just tell her the truth now. And it's like, all right, if you're just gonna let me blame you for running off, then clearly you are never going to tell me the truth about this.
Yeah, that's a little sticky. But ultimately, I do really like that she decides, like, you know what, yeah, just because you're a superhero doesn't make what you've been doing okay. So, F off.
Yeah.
But then, after the whole situation with his dad, he's healed up, comes home, and she's just like, Mark, and smooches him, and he's like, does this mean? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, what the heck is this? Like, nothing's changed. Like, he found out his dad was evil, and he got beaten half to death. But what has actually changed in terms of how he's going to live his life and how he's going to treat you?
Yeah, it doesn't seem in her character because it doesn't seem practical. Like,
Nothing's actually changed.
Yeah, just even if Mark as a person had learned anything, I would see this character as being like, okay, like I'm sorry for you, Mark, but I probably shouldn't be involved in this and I shouldn't make this like my life. Like the kind of person who has sort of like the mindset to say it doesn't matter that you're a superhero, that doesn't make the fact that you lied to me okay, that's not going to lead to a good relationship, probably also isn't going to think it's going to be a good relationship to like be with someone who's got all this stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, even sidestepping all the baggage of his dad being a tyrant and murdering thousands of people, trying to murder him. Um, like Mark has not handled his situation with Amber very well at all.
Yeah, and especially since again, if he's going to be doing his dad's job now, like even if Amber does like hold a great deal of affection for Mark, the issue has been that he's not been able to be around and he doesn't have the time for her and she rightfully feels mad about that. He's going to have way less time for her starting now.
And granted, he does turn down the offer from Cecil, which is interesting because that's not how it was in the comics. Like he took Cecil's offer immediately. And he was Cecil, like he's the Nick Fury of this universe, and he's been paying Mark to work for him. Like anytime he needs a call, like there's some kind of threat, supervillain, whatever, like Mark is at his beck and call, and he pays for the house, like everything, like Mark's college, everything, all that's covered. Um, and they have what's interesting is so like they have a falling out when they do the Reaniman story, which doesn't happen till that's also a story that doesn't happen till much later, when that like super smart college dude is reanimating either just homeless people or people from the college, like turning them into androids, murderous androids.
Yep.
That doesn't happen until much later in the comics, and after that whole deal, after that whole ordeal is handled, Cecil takes him. Mark doesn't know this, by the way. Cecil takes him and under his wing and allows him to keep doing those experiments because he wants to have a private army for himself in case Invincible either gets out of line or decides he agrees with his dad, or just a worst case scenario. Always plan for the worst.
Yeah.
And Mark's
I mean, a couple, like what, 5 or 6 of them did end up being quite helpful. So again, very practical move.
Absolutely. But Mark in the original comic story is like, this is awful. Like he's committed all these atrocities. He's ruined people's lives. Like you can't do this. And they have like a huge falling out over it, and he stops working for him. But that's obviously not a thing in the show. So I'm interested to see if they do have a super major falling out, what that would end up being.
We're not entirely sure. Are we sure, like, where the bodies for those things are coming from in the show? Because they still.
Well, yeah, he said dead soldiers, so they're using dead soldiers.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, I missed that line. So yeah, I don't know. This could be a situation where, like early bits of this show are mostly faithful to the comics, but we have small changes that are then setups for massive deviations down the line. I could see that happening.
Another change I really like is Mark's friend William. So in the original comic storyline, he is not gay, or at least not immediately. He weirdly starts dating Amber. Amber later, much later, after they've broken up and she's with Mark, kind of admits that, I was only even with him to get closer to you, and that whole thing's kind of weird. And I wish that line was not. Yeah, that line. I really wish that line was not said. Like we could have done without that. That's kind of awful and throws you under the bus. But he's with her, and he's even way more kind of obnoxious and tone deaf in the comics, and he eventually comes out as gay, and she's like, Oh, that makes so much sense when they break up. Um, it's like, yeah, and like, so making him gay right off the bat, I think, is much better for a myriad of reasons. Um, and it's just, it's non-issue. He's gay right off the bat, and I think just it's good for representation, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And it's another like complication that the story doesn't need.
It really doesn't need that. Like, I'm glad like there was no like first Eve started dating him, and then she hops over to Marley. It just that whole thing was weird, and I don't know why they even did it in the comics. But yeah, so that's another change that I think is really strong. Um, the whole thing with Robot is truncated for this season. That also doesn't happen until
Yeah, I know that we didn't get there like nearly as fast.
Oh no, that was like a long overarching thing that they kept giving you nuggets of well after Omni-Man had left the planet. But I really like it. Also, the Muller twins, like they're even better in the show. Like the Muller twins are kind of the MVP. Like I really like they're really fun, like antagonistic characters that constantly like bust each other's chops. It's like he's created this kind of like he doesn't have an actual brother, so he's created this kind of brother relationship for himself.
Yeah, like I like that. I like that the whole which one of us is the clone, which one of us is the original. Like at first you're like, oh man, is this gonna be like a whole thing? Like why would you do this to yourself? But then he's like, no, we intentionally make it vague on purpose because we just like messing with each other. Like they do it for fun.
Yeah, there's something really endearing about those two crazy mad scientists that constantly have to one up each other and try to invalidate the other by saying that the other is the clone.
Yeah, like it's a game to them.
Yeah, that whole thing's really fun, and I can't wait to see more of them. But yeah, so that storyline is really interesting and goes to some bizarre and insanely complicated places later. I'm interested to see how much of that they keep and how much they change. But I really like Zachary Quinto as Robot. I'm still floored and astounded that they got some of the people that they got to come in and do a cartoon.
Yeah.
Mahershala Ali, I mean, what?
Yeah. Although, am I wrong? Has he never done a voice role before?
I don't know. But, I don't think of Mahershala Ali as, taking voice roles for a cartoon.
Yeah, that's definitely not the first thing that would come to mind.
But yeah, there's all the changes, pretty much all the changes for the most part, only serve to improve the story. And I really like that Adam Eve gets her own story, like apart from Mark and dealing with her parents and figuring out who she is and everything.
Yeah.
That might be one of my favorite storylines in the show, just because it feels I think that's honestly, I mean, there's some of that in the comics early on, but that feels almost wholly original. Like there wasn't really a ton of that going on in the early stages of the comics, like her rebelling a bit against her parents and like firmly deciding who she is and what she wants to do. I mean, like the whole thing about her wanting to, change the world for the better, that's still there. I mean, that was there in the comics. And she went to Africa. It wasn't like this place over in the States that she goes to. It's obviously not too far away from Mark. She went all the way to Africa in the comics and was helping out over there.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't super invested in like her plot. Like I enjoyed her scenes.
Like it doesn't have a lot to do with Mark, so I can understand that.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like it like really concludes at all. Like if it had been given sort of like an ending to go along with the ending of the season, then maybe. But right now it feels like it's just kind of floating there.
Yeah, I can understand that. I'm just saying that I like that she has something to do and she's not just, Mark's soon-to-be love interest just floating in the background.
Yeah, like it's good that they at least gave her something.
I've also seen a lot of people hating on the symbol. I don't know if you noticed, but the female symbol with the X across it,
Oh
and
yeah, I feel
and
like I picked up on it and then I promptly forgot about it.
of course, people are blowing that out of proportion. But it was simply just an issue of it's more economical and efficient to animate as opposed to doing the whole like atom symbol that she has in the comics. But you know, Robert Robert Kirkman has come out and said they are going to fix that for season 2.
Huh. Yeah, honestly, I didn't like. It hardly even registered for me.
Something else that I mean, we're gonna. I want to round out to a bunch of different aspects of the show, but the finale in particular was really really fun for me because like pretty much half that episode, dialogue wise and more or less scene wise, is ripped straight out of the comics.
Huh.
Like pretty much everything that Omni-Man says to Mark straight out of the comics. And we almost never get adaptations that close, like whole scenes straight out of the comic. Like that was insane to me. Like I was like, wow, like this is actually happening. Like this whole sequence is actually being brought to life before my eyes, and it was so much fun. The finale in particular was really interesting for me because there's also a number of notable changes. So I don't know if you noticed, but so you know how when Mark is trying to catch half of that building, and the mother and daughter, they end up dying. He can't save them. In the book, he saves them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the show, he fails to save them and then end up dying.
Because I felt like that was like a really powerful scene, not just in the fact that they died, but it gets into kind of like the Man of Steel like collateral damage thing of all that happened, and like not just those two people, but there was a ton more collateral and a bunch more people died because Omni-Man threw one punch.
One punch.
He punched Mark once, and that's what happened. And I thought that the fact that Mark can't save them is like, oh, geez, that's a really powerful statement right there.
On top of that, they introduced a wholly new scene unique to the show that most fans of the comic, myself included, most fans of the comic, myself included, are like, that's iconic. That's seared into my brain. I'll never forget that. Is him just holding Mark in place and making him go through an entire train. Like, that was horrible.
Yeah. Like, it didn't quite, like, have the punch for me that it did for you and everyone else, but, like, it's one of those things where sitting down watching it, I wasn't, like, having a reaction, but intellectually in my brain, I understand that it is ludicrous. It's, like, insanely dark.
And especially just because, for me, like, there's so many moments that they nailed right out of the comics, like how the Immortal is killed for the second time, like that whole motion of like him jamming the fist in and cutting him out, ripped straight out of the comics. But just to see like a whole new scene like that was really really cool. Like they were coming up with these simplistic but like incredibly iconic moments, and it was it was awesome to watch. The other scene, well, there's a number of other scenes that are also coming from the comics. Wait, but before I touch on that, I do want to mention the title card, because it's really cutesy, but I freaking love it, and I hope they never stop doing it.
Like they don't even clean it up. They don't clean it up for the second season.
That's the thing I'm curious about, and why I've been messaging. Another thing I love about the Invincible Twitter page is they're super interactive with fans.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I've been messaging them. Yeah, I've been trying to get an answer as to how they're going to handle the title card moving forward, and also if we're ever going to get the black and blue suit that Mark wears.
Hmm.
They haven't gotten back to me on either one of those yet, but I'm gonna keep poking and prodding until I eventually get an answer, and I know that answer because they're really interactive with fans, and I think that's super cool.
The
But
implication I got from that little image that they posted was that they were gonna like quote unquote clean it up for the start of season 2.
yeah, and just have it start clean and pristine, and just get progressively worse every season.
Yeah.
But I think that whole thing is really fun. Um, it's especially because he talked about how he didn't want to waste any time doing like a drawn out like title sequence. But at the same time, like that's so like distinct and
Yeah.
memorable. Like that's something like I've like every YouTube channel that I've seen like do reaction videos to the show, they always laugh about that. And like that's always a thing that like they'll joke and talk about is like, oh, when's it gonna happen? When are they gonna when are they gonna do it? What are they
Yeah.
gonna do?
It
Invincible.
creates this neat little anticipation, and it's like, okay, if we're not gonna have a full title sequence, we at least do have a thing that's gonna stick in people's heads more than just the title, and that's it, and there it is.
Yeah, someone's gonna like in place Invincible. And you're like, wow, this is where they drop it.
Yeah, and the fact that they always get to it in the dialogue is cute.
And because of that, it can happen anywhere in the episode. Like in
Yeah.
the first episode, it's like the tail end. And then it just kind of happens like throughout. Like sometimes it'll happen 20, maybe even 30 minutes into an episode.
I think that what is it? That sort of running gag or like undercurrent with the kid and his stepdad is interesting. Again, they don't really like end it, but it's certainly an interesting idea to like run through most of the episodes.
I just like that as a way of, putting us in the world through the eyes of just everyday people.
Yeah.
I don't even remember how the original comic started off, but it wasn't that. So I just really appreciated that they were going for something different, but also grounding it. Now, to speak to the Invincible comic a little more, what I like about it in comparison to The Boys is, not only the fact that it's actually good, but it's also not the same thing. Like in trying to sell the show to people, they'll just say, "Oh, it's The Boys," but as a cartoon, and like that, I think that's doing the show a great disservice because it's so much more nuance to it than that, and it's not that. Like it's nowhere near as satirical and I guess like for a better word, political. It's not dealing with the same themes and,
Yeah,
and
it
that kind of
really feels like the only things that they have in common is the
the
insane
violence
amount of
and
gore
some
and
occasional
violence.
swearing.
Yeah. But like if you take those two things out of it, and I think you honestly very easily could, then Invincible is much more of a straightforward kind of superhero narrative, like specifically a DC pastiche. And like The Boys, you can't separate it from the satire and political angles because that's the point. And so I think on a surface level I can see and both have evil murderous Superman pastiche as their central figure, like the one driving a lot of the plot and story. So like I can see that. Like comparisons between Omni-Man and Homelander come really easy, but I don't know, I think there's enough difference. But like I can see why people who again to an extent that we kind of have to remind ourselves of view these things on a surface level a lot of the time. They do kind of can get those two things conflated.
Um, but that's another thing I just like about it. It's not like Invincible is not a satirical story. It pays some. It only pays homage to stuff outside of the universe in that you have your analog Superman, your analog Flash, and
Yeah, that
Batman.
when I say pastiche, I don't mean satire. I just mean kind of like a send up to those things.
Yeah, like you have characters that are obviously standing in place of those characters to, it's just like a wink and nudge thing at the audience. But we're not like outright parodying that specifically or even doing necessarily a commentary on those specific characters. We're doing our own unique story. Um, we've got some nuggets of familiarity, but it's it's also not overtly cynical in the way that The Boys is. It's just so like things like the story will get real and people will start dying and blood and body parts will start flying everywhere, but it's not like Mark. I would still describe Invincible, despite all of that, as more or less just as lighthearted and fun and kind of zany as a Spider-Man comic. It's still very colorful, and bright and poppy, and like obviously even in the Spider-Man comics there are moments where shit gets real and Peter has to buckle up and start taking situations seriously, but it's that's what it is. It's like it's a more traditional superhero thing with some really cool twists and unique aspects to that universe thrown in, but it's not um, trying to completely reinvent the wheel, so to speak. It's doing its own thing as far as the story goes. I really like that. But it is, squarely not just The Boys as a cartoon.
I'll disagree with the lighthearted thing insofar as like I know I started us in this place and dragging us back there, but like this is why I say that argument that I made at the start as to like the mystery with Nolan being something that drags it down. Like I'm not I don't agree with the me of like 2 weeks ago who had that feeling because like I do think it would be that more sort of like Spider-Man level lighthearted thing even with the violence if not for the fact that Nolan is such a central character and the fact that we end episode 1 with like why did he do this? He just did this act of insane violence and we're not sure what his deal is until the very end. You don't know who, if anyone, is safe in a room with him, not even Debbie or Mark, but you don't know to what extent. And so he's in so much of the show that even when it's starting to feel lighthearted, as soon as he comes back in, it gets real heavy. Even if it's not conscious, it's like, oh God, I don't know if I can be comfortable in a scene that has this man in it because I don't know what's motivating him.
I just, I think that the mystery, and granted, you're coming at it from someone who doesn't know the comics, and I do.
But like I'm saying that as a good thing, just to be clear.
Okay, just like I like that there is tension in those scenes. It gives it this like it's just that much more compelling. Like that scene when, like right after Debbie and the Taylor find out for sure that that Nolan flat out murdered the Guardians of the Globe, and they have those beers together. You don't know if like he's trying to catch him off balance, get him to admit that he knows, and then kill him. Like you don't really know what he's gonna do in that scene, and that's compelling. That's thrilling drama.
Yeah.
And that kind of
Guardians of the
stuff
Globe,
wasn't
we
there
didn't
in the original
mention.
story.
Oops, sorry. What'd you say?
I was just saying that stuff wasn't there in the original story because
Yeah.
there was no people are suspicious of Nolan subplot going on. But I like that that's there in the show. It's just an added layer of intrigue.
And speaking of the Guardians of the Globe, we didn't really mention the new Guardians at all. The most fun being Rex, played by Jason Montezukis, who I guess is just who you go to casting if you want sort of like a really obnoxious kind of idiot character who you can't help but like, even if you also really dislike him. Because he's Rex, he's Derek on The Good Place, he's Steelbeak in DuckTales, and those are all characters where it's like, they're fun, but they're fun precisely because they're not actually endearing. Like they're really obnoxious, and you feel like if you had to spend any time with them in real life, like you'd hate them, and all the other characters find them super obnoxious. But that's kind of fun.
Yeah, Rex is race bent in the show.
I remember him
He,
being like, yeah.
yeah, I don't know if he's Hispanic or Indian or an Islander or what, but like, in the comics, he's just a white dude. Um, and honestly, like he is a douche in the comics, but he's just way more likable here in the show. Like, um, and that's saying something because he's really douchey in this show.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the voice.
Yeah, just so much personality comes through, and I I like that he for as obnoxious as he is, there's slivers like little moments where you're like, this guy could just be like a decent human being, and he's just choosing to be obnoxious.
Yeah.
But by the time like they're drinking beer out of milk jugs, and Black Samson's like, "Yeah, I got my powers back, for karma, putting up with this clown," and they like each other and joke around, like,
Like at
even though
that
we
point,
don't,
we're just used to him.
yeah, like I like that moment. Um, Monster Girl is a great addition.
Yeah, she's fun.
That's a really, just conceptually, she's a really interesting character. Um, they go some places with her in the comics that were really, honestly, really shocking. Like I never expected, like, because when they tell you what her issue is, you're like, wow, that's messed up. Um, and then like you expect them to at some point be able to resolve that, and they do resolve that, but at a heavy, heavy price in the comics. And I'm interested to see how we'll get to that. Um, but yeah, I like her a lot. I like that voice actress. Um, I knew so when we do the Battle Beast episode and she gets thrashed the way she does, I'm like, they did not just kill Monster Girl this early. There's no way in hell. And then they like Robot, comes up with a way to heal her. And I'm like, okay, good. We can still do that story with them. Um, but yeah, she's got a sympathetic plight. She's got an interesting power set, and I think she was added in very well. Um, Black Samson is kind of like, I like him in the show, but it's weird because they haven't even in the show given us what his power is.
Oh yeah, I kind of.
Like, we don't even know what his power is yet. I think that's interesting. I'm thinking that they might give him a different one. I'm not sure, but we shall see. But I do really like him, and I want to see him as the eventual like leader, because I think it was really cool that he laid out for them like that they weren't behaving like a team, and it got like a bus of civilians injured, and like at that point he didn't even have any powers. He was just a guy in a mech suit, and the mech suit wasn't even super reliable. Like they fight Battle Beast, and it fritzes out on him.
Yeah.
But yeah, all the Guardians of the Globe characters are solid. I mean, with the exception of Kate, they so in the comics, she and the Immortal end up getting together, and he kind of like he doesn't resume the leadership position, but he comes back onto the team, and they're a thing, and that's super weird. And I mean, like it mellows out as the story goes on. I guess I just got used to it, but I remember thinking like, why are we putting Immortal and her together after
Yeah,
she
that doesn't seem
basically,
great.
yeah, especially after. So Rex cheats on um Eve with Duplicate, they're kind of together for a while, and then Duplicate cheats on Rex with Immortal, and Eva's like, oh, that doesn't feel very good, does it? Like, kind of like sticks her tongue out. Well, she doesn't actually stick her tongue out, but you know what I mean. She's really facetious about the fact, like, yeah, like that doesn't feel too good, does it?
You know
And
what?
then,
I think that maybe comic writers have a problem with infidelity that needs to be talked about.
yeah, we got to talk about that. It's never okay. Like, why do we like that's never valid
So
or
weird that that's a
endearing
story
or
point, like a story device that they go to so often.
yeah. And the worst part is like they expect us to just be okay. Like it's just a thing people do, and like that is a thing people do, but it's not okay. Like
Yeah, like I don't think because it's never treated as okay, but it's always treated as like, it's a mistake, whatever, it's a thing that happens. It's like, I mean, you really shouldn't be writing your characters like that if you want me to be on their side and like sympathize with them, but okay, whatever, you do you, I guess.
yeah, I really don't like that Mark's first kiss with Eve in the comics is him cheating on Amber. Like I detest that so much, especially since like I really come to be invested and care about their relationship. And there's I want to say it's after um okay, yeah, so it's the Viltrumite War. Um Not going to go into the details of that because I don't want to spoil too much for you. But there is a Viltrumite War that happens, and Mark has to go out into space to participate in. It's like this whole big adventure that spans like multiple months. Um, and he's together with Eve when he has to go and leave for the Viltrumite War. And when he gets back, Eve is forever changed. No, not forever changed, but like for a good long time after that, Eve is not the same. And I'm wondering if they were to do that in the show, people would take that the wrong way. Um, I'm gonna just come out and tell you what the change with Eve is. So Eve is more or less exactly how she is in the show, right? Fairly, petite, super skinny, fit.
Mhm.
Um, Mark leaves for I want to say 8 or 9 months. She doesn't even know if he's alive or not. Like they don't have any contact. But Mark comes back, and first of all, she was pregnant when he left.
Well, okay then.
Yeah, she was pregnant when he left. 8 months later, he comes back. There's no baby. She got an abortion, and she has gained a lot of weight, and she's kind of fat now from like depression and everything, and stays
Huh.
that way for a good long time in the comics.
Huh. Well, okay then.
Yeah.
I would not be remotely surprised if we avoided doing that in the show. Again, just the small changes that we've already set up lead me to believe just with the way that I've seen certain things get adapted into TV shows prior to now, I've seen it happen enough times where early seasons will make small changes that balloon into like big changes later on. So I think that's where we're going to end up with this.
And he did one of the things that excites me the most is Robert Kirkman did talk about doing some original storylines that are completely unique to the show and not influenced by the comics whatsoever. Specifically, bringing uh, Dark Blood back and having a series of episodes, or at least a episode, where Mark has to go to hell.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
yeah, and that's something that he always wanted to do in the comics, but for whatever reason didn't get around to doing. But yeah, I really like the voice cast. The stories and everything have been great. Um, like I said, they did do a little bit of a disservice to like the climactic final episode with doing the fifth episode so early, um, because like yeah, it's a cutesy funny thing that his name is Invincible, and he's constantly getting beaten in fights, but and badly. But I think like that episode is all the more impactful if it's the first time that it happens, like it is in the comics.
Yeah. And like I will say, for me, episode 7 and 8 together are like the highlight of the show. Like as soon as the turn happens with Omni-Man and it's him versus the world, then that becomes, I think, really fun and engaging. And I don't know. I wish I could have contributed a bit more to this overall talk, just because I still can't quite put into words or like intellectualize what it is that's holding this show back for me. I really am not just. I'm not sure what the thing is that I feel like it's missing compared to everyone else. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's good. I recommend it. And like, if it seems like the kind of thing that you would like, then I think you're gonna love it. But yeah.
Two more quick things I want to mention. I really love the soundtrack. I think the soundtrack
Yeah.
is really solid. I took the time to look up the playlist and put some of the songs on my phone because I thought the songs were that catchy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would say I mean, for the most part, the animation is like pretty solid, serviceable, and even great at times. But the only time I like the cheapness of the animation took me out was episode 4 when they go to the Mars planet.
Uh, yeah. You know, certain shots I remember from that being not great.
But with Netflix, with Amazon Prime fully behind them and back in 2 more seasons, I'm sure like all that'll get ironed out and we'll have nothing but great looking episodes moving forward. So I'm really happy with what we have right now. I'm very excited for what is it called? Jupiter's Legacy by Mark Millar. That comic getting adapted into a show. I just think we have, you know, we're spoiled. Like I told you earlier, like
Yeah.
between The Boys, this, Umbrella Academy, like getting things that aren't Marvel or DC, like these more like indie comics adapted. Um,
And get
that's
them
just
with so much thought and like money and put into them.
yeah, like it's just super exciting, and it's an abundance of riches, and I can't wait to see season 2 and 3. Um, but yeah, that was our overall discussion on both Falcon and Winter Soldier and Invincible.
Hopefully,
Uh,
as we do more of these, we will get to streamline them a bit, because this does go on for a while.
this does go on for a long. I don't expect anyone to actually listen to this. Well, at least not the full thing, but we'll see how this goes. Um, but yeah, I think the next time we do this, we'll definitely be talking about Jupiter's Legacy. I don't know what our other topic will be. I don't know if like you can think of any new movies or shows that are coming out in the future that you'd want to make sure we hit.
Well, remind me when that drops.
I'm pretty sure that drops next week. Well, not next week. Maybe the week after. It drops on the 13th, I believe.
Huh. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens between now and then.
But yeah, guys, thanks for listening to Stark Contrast, and we will see you on the next one.
Yeah, see you next time.